Why is the news always bad? You open up the TV, open up YouTube, or even Reddit or Instagram, and it's usually full with stories that make you want to question life. A recent study in the 2000s found that 50% of news in America, Austria, Italy, and even Germany is negative, and only 6% is positive. That means that 94 out of 100 times, if you open up the TV, you're probably going to see something that's going to make you sad, anxious, angry, disappointed, or frustrated. Why is this the case? Is the world around us really that bad, or is there something more at play here? It's important to know that news wasn't always like this. The earliest known texts date back to the Roman Empire, where Acta Diurnam, or Daily Acts, was a handwritten news bulletin board posted in public so that people could know about announcements, government proceedings, and other notable events happening throughout the day, the week, and the month. This daily bulletin board method was very popular in other parts of the world as well, and continued to be the main form of getting news for the next few centuries. This rapidly changed in the 15th century with the development of the printing press, which completely revolutionized the art of news. The first printed newspaper, called Relation, was published in 1605 in Strasbourg, and then newspapers began to emerge in Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries, first as small pamphlets, single sheets containing news, advertisements, and more importantly, opinions. This increasing rise in newspapers coincided perfectly with the rising rate of literacy and aided in the spread of ideas during the Enlightenment. People began to read philosophies, theories, and really started to think on their own. People started to take note, and pretty soon you had businessmen trying to capitalize on this new form of getting news. And then came privatized print media. When you start a business, it's essential for it to make money. That is the purpose of making the business in the first place. And when it comes to news, attention is money. These businessmen wanted people to get their newspaper over the other dozens of newspapers available to them, and thus entered the concept of yellow journalism. In order to get more sales, they utilized sensationalism, which is favoring shocking stories over factual accuracies or nuances, and they could get away with it because there was no laws and no regulations around circulation of news media. This also included exaggerated headlines and dramatic illustrations and cartoons that were not the most realistic but got people to buy the newspaper. These businessmen also started to notice that picking sides was a good thing, even though it might not be the best thing for societal truth. So they started to align themselves politically and carve out a niche for themselves so that they could target and market to a particular audience. This in fact led to press wars, most notably between Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal. Due to this ultra-competitiveness, public opinion started to get shaped by the news, and oftentimes was very misinformed. Journalistic integrity went out the window in order to get a few more sales, and led to some pretty bad circumstances. One clear example is the Spanish-American War of 1898, which was fueled by sensationalistic and often exaggerated coverage of the events happening, leading to an increased public support for US intervention, making it easier for the people in power to exercise their will and intervene. In the Spanish-controlled regions of the world, including Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippines, and Guam, this trend carried on in the 20th century and wasn't helped by worldwide events such as World War I and II, which naturally were negative and had stories of conflict, casualties, destruction, and human suffering. Although not all negative news stories are bad, oftentimes we need to highlight what's wrong in society to improve on it, and this was the case with the civil rights movement, where news and journalism was used to highlight systemic issues, inequality, and the several injustices that people suffered being part of a minority group. By the start of the 1980s, the demand for news was so great that Ted Turner formed CNN, the cable news network, and started a 24/7 news cycle. Launched in June, its continuous news coverage marked a significant departure from traditional news coverage, which had timed broadcasts. CNN covered around-the-clock news, events, stories from all across the world. This was the first taste of what modern news coverage would look like, and some argue it's the worst thing to happen to news reporting. Filling up 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, 4 weeks a month for 52 weeks a year is not easy, and this further eroded journalistic integrity and led to a huge rise in opinion and analysis-based news. Opinions are not really news, they're discussions, and being aired on the same news channel might be mistaken for being true. Supporters of the 24/7 news cycle argue that humans are naturally inclined towards negative news. Professor Stuart Soroka conducted a comprehensive study on this to find out how true this was. He conducted a massive 17-country-wide study with over 1,100 participants. The main purpose of the study was that participants watched 7 news stories. They had noise-canceling headphones on, and they had sensors on their fingers to capture blood volume pulse. The stories they presented were a mixture of good and bad stories. Some examples of the good stories include a company in Brazil that employs blind dancers, a a young child recovering from liver disease, and a news story about ABBA, because everybody loves ABBA. Examples of negative stories include a Peruvian town burning down, a UN investigation into war crimes, and activists blocking girls from going to school. Through studying skin conductance, they wanted to identify immediate reactions to the news stories. They also asked participants if they think that the media is focused too much on bad news. The results were surprising. Even the participants that said that the media focused too much on bad news, said that they were politically active and conscious, were more likely to click on bad news, even though they said that they wish there was more good news in the world. In fact, people more interested in current affairs and politics were more likely to choose bad news. Participants also had a physical reaction more towards negative words like war than to positive words like baby, smile, or fun. And when you think about it, especially in today's world run by social media, reaction is the first thing that people look for. If you react to something, for example, a thumbnail on a YouTube video, maybe this video, I did have a good thumbnail, hopefully, you're more likely to click on it. In fact, research from New York University conducted by Claire Robinson found out that if a negative word is in a headline, the click-through rate for that news article, video, or story goes up by 2.3%. Let's just take YouTube as an example. If YouTube sees that a story or a video of mine is getting a click-through rate higher than the average click-through rate for my channel, it's going to suggest it to more people. I'm going to notice this feedback loop, and I'm going to try and make more of that video. And at a larger scale, media companies and other creators are doing the same and have millions of dollars of ad revenue, sponsorship revenue, and even brand deals attached to it. The consequences of not being sensational and honest are just not worth it when it comes to these big news corporations. And this is particularly pronounced as they've shifted to the digital landscape. According to Pew Research Center, 86% of US adults say that they get their news from the smartphone, tablet, or computer. This is particularly alarming because according to research by Ralph Schroeder of the University of Oxford, people who consume news online and on social media are more prone to selective exposure. That is just how the mysterious, the all-knowing algorithm works. No matter if you use YouTube, Twitter, or X I should say, Facebook, Reddit, Instagram, Google, or any other site or search engine, the algorithm knows exactly the kind of person you are. It knows your political leaning, knows your soft spots or the things you like, and more importantly, it knows the things that really piss you off. And that leads to the formation of bipartisan news, or in simpler words, news that completely ignores the other side and just fuels to your already existing biases. If, for example, I really hate avocados, I don't, but let's just assume that I do. I keep searching YouTube and Google for why avocados are so bad, why no one should ever eat avocados, and why we should all burn avocados together. Then I go and click my YouTube homepage. I can almost guarantee you I'm going to get a video about how a person got really sick eating avocados, or a Facebook ad about how avocados are bad and why I should try this substitute to avocados, this magic pill that gives you all the nutrients you need to have a happy daily life. News media is made to get your attention, fuels further into your already existing beliefs, and doesn't give you a complete picture of the entire story. And not just one video or one ad, I'm going to get several videos. Companies and individuals know about this, and more formally call this the concept of cognitive overload. There's a bombardment of news that favors your opinion and maybe also that doesn't favor your opinion online. Millions of news sources, hundreds of thousands of hours of footage, and millions of opinions by people throughout the world. To put this into some context, a 2014 study found that on average, a Sunday edition of a New York Times contains more information than a typical 19th century citizen would consume in their entire lifetime. It is amazing how much information we have to consume every day. This cognitive overload also leads to information avoidance, which is detrimental to forming a whole and comprehensive opinion. When you're bombarded with so much information, you tend to stick to what you initially believed in because you start to equate all news stories as being equal in terms of how true they are. More importantly, the more news you consume, the more unlikely your future self is to consume news, leading to news avoidance. This further decreases the probability of you changing your opinion. Not saying opinions are right or wrong, but making an informed opinion is definitely important. And maybe even more importantly, information overload leads to bad decisions according to some studies. Research conducted by Peng et al. Found out that the more information you give to people, the less time they have to process it, and the less time they spend on making an informed opinion. It might seem contrary, but people that consume less news made more confident opinions because they had more time to logically walk through their thought process. People who consume more news also paid less attention to news and faced media fatigue, leading to emotional exhaustion. This leads to a whole variety of other things like anxiety, FOMO, since there's so much going on and you don't want to miss out on any of it. Overall, not a very positive view of news. I guess this brings up the question, should you even consume news? Especially because research from the University of Netherlands found that if the news is more related to you, you're going to be even more severely impacted by it and have a negative response. And like we discussed, these companies know exactly who we are, so is it worth it feeling negative all the time? Personal relevance is in fact the key separator between having an emotional response and having a neutral response. Well, it's important to start consciously consuming news, especially at a young age, and we're not necessarily trending in the right direction. A study by the Stanford Graduate School took 7,800 students and tested them with information on social media, news articles, and comments. They found that 82% of middle school students couldn't tell the difference between sponsored news and real news stories. Most of the high schoolers didn't bother to verify whether photos taken online came from a credible source, and many of them couldn't tell the difference between a fake news article and a real one. In fact, 30% of them thought that a fake news story from Fox News was more reliable than one that was actually from Fox News. I guess that says something more about Fox News, but the point still remains. 80% of them couldn't even identify biased content from independent news sources supported by lobbying firms. Even though this doesn't sound great, and even adults are consuming misinformation, media literacy is never too late to start. Always compare news sites, verify websites, and try to diversify your news by searching the opposite of what you believe in. And with the rise of AI, it's particularly important to verify image sources and now video sources. But I guess the most important thing is pausing and really thinking before you decide to share something. The world we live in is now increasingly interconnected. Every conversation you have with someone else sends a signal to what sort of person you are, what sort of person they are, and how to best classify you. The first step we can all take is thinking before we share, because sharing the wrong information leads to worse outcomes for all parties involved. Maybe unsensational, unexaggerated, and realistic news, or some might say the truth, is still out there. You just have to look a tiny bit harder to find it. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.